All right, good evening. So, this is my first live stream, and there's a lot I've been wanting to talk about. As many of you know, I am a yapper, and there are a lot of crazy things that have happened in my life since I turned 20. And you don't have to have everything figured out in life in your 20s. It's a common misconception, it's a common thing that society will tell you, and you don't need to put that much pressure on yourself. A little bit about myself. I started college at HCC, Hartford Community College, in 2019, in January. This is after I went to George Mason for about a year, graduating from Bel Air High School, and went to GMU in Fairfax, Virginia. And things took a turn. Mental health sometimes gets all of us, and that's kind of what happened. So, which led me to leave George Mason and go to HCC. And I graduated in 2022 with a degree in photography, visual arts degree, an AFA. And so AFA stands for Associates of Fine Arts. So everything went amazing, you know. And in from 2019 to 2021, I was working at a deli, giant, giant grocery store deli. It was a horrible job, very stressful job, as most jobs can be. They started to conflict with my work schedule, saying that I need to work more than 3 days a week in four, which is not doable when you're in school, especially in college. And so, yeah, I mean, like I said, it just didn't work out. And one of the things that I want to say is during COVID, it was very, very strange, you know. Um, just there's a lot of things that have happened since 2020, as I've said, that have been big stressors in life. Getting through COVID, that was one thing that was crazy. On top of working in a deli, trying to get my degree, not being able to be around people, and as an artist, what's frustrating about that is like COVID was not the time to stay cooped up in your house. It's one of the downsides of living with your parents in your 20s. As bad as the economy is like you do sacrifice your mental health for living with your parents. It's just how it is. And, like I said, COVID was not the time to stay indoors, regardless of what your family members said. COVID was a time to express yourself as an artist. COVID was a time to explore places because you didn't have to worry about security. And, everybody was online. So the people that were out doing things, you're putting yourself out there as an artist. That is what you should have been doing. It was the perfect time to do that. I kind of wish we'd have another pandemic just because of that was a time period where, if you were out doing things, you didn't have to worry about a lot of people. Especially if you have a group of friends to do that with. And, like listening to my parents was the biggest downfall during that time period. I had friends who actually wanted to hang out and do things, and I barely, seldomly was able to do that other than being on Discord. And like I said, COVID was the time to be exploring abandoned places, not sitting at home doing nothing. People are comfortable in their homes just doing nothing but being online. You have to get uncomfortable, especially if you want to be successful, you know? And so, yeah, I got my degree in 2022. I started exploring places in 2019, right when I started college at HCC. I started with Tome School in Port Deposit. That's one of the first places. That's my baby spot. I love it. I loved exploring that place as much as there's arson there. Um, and yeah, so I started connecting with other explorers on Facebook, you know, and 2021 was when I really started exploring, whether it be abandoned houses, schools, things like that, you know. And then 2022 was kind of like where I fully bloomed into exploring, like massive schools, massive churches, things like that. And then I would say that 2023 was from 2021 to 2023 was probably the best for exploring. I in 2022, 2021 to 2022, I would get off work I was worked at Miller's Ale House, and I would go down to DC and explore a school after getting off 11 o'clock at night. You know, and that was what was awesome. I worked at Giant from 2019 to just about 2021. Yeah, that was when I stopped working. And yeah, like I didn't like working at Giant that much. I do miss that period in time. Um, you know, just the friends that I made through exploring, the experiences I've had, they're irreplaceable. And for anybody out there who's just starting a YouTube or live stream, whatever, I definitely recommend documenting your life. Do a better job of documenting things, whether it's a goofy moment or something. You can't capture everything on film, but you're going to want to, and you're going to wish you did, and that's going to eat you alive, especially as an artist. I mean, like I said, I used to get off work at 11, 12 o'clock at night, sometimes 1 o'clock in the morning, and then I have my friend who would drive to my job, and then we would all carpool, and then we would spend the entire night in DC, and then I would drive straight to work the next morning. Like I wouldn't go home. I would just have my uniform and then hit it again the next day, grind, and then grind with photography and going down to DC. I miss those days. It's like you hit like 3 to 4 places in one night and you just grind out photography. That's the way to do it, because you never know when these places are going to be torn down, and it's like I'm starting over. I had collected so many stuff from places, hospitals, and it sucks that it got thrown out, but that was out of my control. If you have issues with your parents as an artist, doesn't matter how old you are, get a storage unit. I didn't want to spend the money, but the result was I got all my artifacts that I found from abandoned places thrown out, you know, and some of them are irreplaceable. I can't do anything about that. Life is going to hit you with curveballs. You're going to get upset. There's nothing you can do about it. I mean, I had um, an obituary book from a funeral home. Like it's like I wanted to like highlight the highlights of life. That death is a part of life. So I have these artifacts of people's lives and photographs and Polaroids, and you find a lot of old film in abandoned places. You will find like old undeveloped film or developed rolls, and it's nice to have the negatives because you can actually take the negatives and practice color film. You'll find a lot of this stuff in these houses, so it's like preserving history. And your parents may not understand that. They just think it's junk. It's like, but like instead of trying to understand it, they throw it out. You might find a bunch of old records in an abandoned house, and you could sell them for a lot of money. Like life is about figuring things out and just being creative when trying to find new ways to make money. That's what life is all about. And excuse me. So from going from COVID to now, it's hard to believe that COVID was 6 years ago. You know A couple of my photos, actually, one of them did receive an award. I titled it "COVID Forest," and it's like all these masks hang from these trees, and it's from other explorers. So that photo did win the George Mason Research Facility Hub contest, which is very interesting. But it's like in 2026, I have to realign myself as an artist because like you're gonna get frustrated. Someday, one day, especially if you're a younger kid, your parent might throw out some art thing that you really love, but to them it's just junk in their house. That's just how it is. you know um I found records from this house that's called the 90s house, that has really been trashed, since I started exploring it. All the 90s toys are gone, stuff in the kitchen's gone. So when you find these places, I mean, I've been to like an abandoned like children's center, and I went there a week in like July a couple years ago. And then 2 weeks later, it's completely trashed, graffiti everywhere. So these spots, it's a race against time. Okay, it's a race against time to create in these abandoned places because with TikTok and Instagram today, they're gonna just get completely destroyed and messed up very, very easily. And that's the other thing that frustrates me about losing these things is like a lot of these places have been converted into things. Like I found like medals, like sports medals from an abandoned school that got thrown out. And I wanted to do like an assemblage art idea where I take all these artifacts that I find from these abandoned places and have them in front of the photos. Spingarn high school in DC. That was an all black high school. I had photos of African Americans working on cars in that school. I had artifacts from that school. That got thrown out. So it's like I'm realigning and resetting myself as an artist because there's so many artifacts that I found in these places that I can't show you guys because, like I said, it got thrown out. That's part of being an artist and living with parents that don't understand you as an artist. giving me a deadline to do something with it, but I have it sitting in the basement because I'm working on a million other ideas. You can't throw out an artist's stuff. It doesn't matter how old you are. I mean, and there's plenty of people who are still in their 20s living with their parents. So, for people to be like, oh, well, you should have moved out. I had plenty of opportunity to move out. I had $14,000 saved up, but I was going to save that up for another car. Like, that was the mindset. Instead of having parents or someone telling me, like, hey, you have a functioning car right now. Why don't you take your $14,000 and move out? Like I got stuck in the simulation and grind of working a 9 to 5. I was working at Giant at the time when I had $14,000 saved up, and it was around the time of COVID. I should have just said, screw you, not listen to my parents, and traveled during COVID, and met people and, thought outside the box instead of being a sheep and hoarding myself in the house during COVID. Like I said, there were a couple things I did during COVID, but, you really have to get in that artist mindset and be like, you know what? I'm doing this no matter what. That's the mindset you have to get into. It's like I said, I can't stress it enough. If there was ever another pandemic where there were shutdowns, I would have gone back and done a completely different. I would have driven up to New York City, and I would have gotten so many photos of just New York City dead, no one in the streets, because that never happens. You have to take risks. And some people be like, well, you could have gotten COVID. Guess what? I got COVID a year later, after 2020, and I'm fine. You know, that's just how it is. Like you can't let people control you. That's the main thing I want to say here is take risks as an artist, and I can ramble on and on for hours about certain things that have happened, to me in my life in my 20s. I had a girlfriend who liked to explore. She broke up with me Christmas Eve while I was working 2 jobs and, also working on a degree in photography, which was very, very stressful, you know. And yeah, like I said, life is gonna throw you curveballs that you're just gonna have to swing, try to hit that curveball. You're gonna miss sometimes. I just I start working for a photo company now, so that's kind of why I threw that pun in there. I do sports photography, but like I said, like you gotta try to keep your head up. You can't take it out on yourself. You know, um, and it does suck. All the artifacts that I lost from these abandoned places. I mean, I found an America record. America is one of my favorite bands, like old fashioned bands, and to find an America record just in an abandoned house, but then have it thrown out because your parents are like, oh, it's dirty, yada yada yada. It sucks, when you have all these stuff that you want to save onto, you know, and it's like you don't get these memories back. So it's very important for you to document these things one way or another, which is why I started using my GoPro more. I'll use things I don't use them that much. It's very like use your things that you have the ability to use as an artist. It's important that you do that. It is very, very important. You know. So yeah, that's basically what I wanted to talk about here. Is like if you are an up and coming artist or someone who's just starting art, don't be afraid to explore abandoned places. Take risks, be different. Go against the grain of what other people are doing. You know. Cause like I'm starting to tie abandoned places into rapes. Like these are two outlets that as a kid, just I was raised in a very religious Catholic family, and like very kind of strict, things like my mother would call hippies, and people who go to like music festivals and camp and all that jazz, like weirdos, and anybody who dressed different, like so I thought I had to like conform. I used to wear jean shorts and dress shirts to school almost every day, or just regular sweatshirts. It's like I had no fashion, I had no style. That's something that's important, to teach your kid to develop their own style, at a young age. Kind of figure out who they are as a person, guide them to do that, you know. And I don't want to spend too much time talking, but there's a lot of things that I can talk about, so that's why I started this, kind of live, and I'm gonna post this to YouTube. So and yeah, it's like I said, there's just so many outlets and avenues. Like I want to start an organization called Beats and Bandos, where I tie in ravers and raving into abandoned places where like as long as there's not too wrecked and not too of an untouched place, I have to find that middle ground where I've helped DJs throw underground raves in abandoned places, and I don't want to blow up certain places. It's got to be places that are well known, and I can just do photography there. Because RFK Stadium, I have photos of RFK Stadium, and I would have loved to have done an underground rave at RFK Stadium before they tore it down. That could have definitely brought a police presence, but I wanted to do photo shoots with people dressed up, as ravers and different cosplay things in this abandoned, stadium. But it's being torn down. It's already been torn down. So I got a couple shots in RFK, but I know that I'm not going to be satisfied as an artist when it comes to exploring abandoned places and getting all the shots that I want, because you're always going to be hungry for more. You know, I've gotten into 35 millimeter film. I've gotten into cyanotype, daguerreotype, and I haven't done any of that in a while. So and it's like RFK would have been perfect to get photos of in black and white. So I'm gonna try to do more industrial stuff in black and white. That is a goal of mine. You know, because like I said, and anybody who explores out here, you're gonna get frustrated when these places get torn down because you were so indulged in not in the great word, and you're so invested in trying to get the shots that you want in these places before they get torn down. That's the issue, you know. And you could think of like, and after a place is gone, you'll think of a million other things you could do. It's the same thing when you're photographing a wedding. And I'm gonna get more into photographing weddings and different settings to use in when it comes to photography. That's the other thing I made this account for. But this account is also for like talking about life talks, and just getting frustrated and how to deal with getting frustrated as an artist when things don't work out and life hits you with challenging things. I even wrecked my car in 2024. I fell asleep behind the wheel. So I don't have wheels right now. I don't have cars, so it's like I have to rely on friends to drive me places when I do want to create art. So it gets frustrating because I can't have my own control in getting places and really executing these ideas right now. But it's the people who help me that I really appreciate, and like I can still create art because the biggest way you can deal with your frustrations is by creating art. I feel like a lot of people do have anger. I have pent up anger, frustrations, and I channel all that into my art. And that is the only productive and I think the greatest solution to that problem right there. But I'm gonna end this now, and I will talk more about what's going on in my life later on. I'm just happy that I have a photo job right now. And, I don't know if I'm going to make it, but I have a photo gig in South Carolina on the 26th in 5 days. And I have no way down. The only way down would be a bus or a train, since I don't have a car. And unfortunately, I don't really know anybody in Maryland who is willing to drive down to South Carolina, even though if you're media, you get a free festival pass and everything. So we'll see what happens. But right now, I'm doing baseball photography. So this has been OBC Explorers. Peace out.